Hi, we're just a few weeks away from the publication of my next book, In the Twist of the Dial. It's about the 60 years that I spent in radio from 1960 to 2020. It's about my career, but more than that, it's about all the changes that have happened in the radio industry. And I think it'll be very informative and very enjoyable. Going to give you a little sneak preview of the book. This is the introduction, just part of the introduction to the book In the Twist of the Dial. That's what we always do on the radio before we turn the microphone on. Unfortunately, the microphone is on, and I just cleared my throat. So here is part of the introduction to In the Twist of the Dial. Remember the guilty thrill of listening to your radio tucked with you in bed so your parents couldn't hear it? Listening to your music played by your favorite DJ, knowing your friends were doing the same thing, hearing the same songs. Or do you remember sitting in the living room looking at a piece of furniture with a non existent screen to see a story you could only hear? I grew up sitting and looking at a radio. Later, I became that DJ, maybe playing your tunes or the person who decided what records would be played and what the announcer would say. I've worked, lived a lifetime in radio. By the time you read this book, the medium that I've spent 6 decades working in may well have disappeared or devolved into a form unrecognizable, indistinguishable from the myriad of impressions that bombard our devices and brains, each individually, eventually leaving no impression at all. You may have grown up online clicking on the music news and opinions you wanted to hear. You may find it interesting that the way much of what you hear on your devices today was initially structured and programmed on radio stations. You'll see that radio, like the internet, brought people together and then sorted them out. Radio chronicled the news, music, and fads of the 20th century. Well, those of us in radio were covering these stories, playing that music, and often part of those fads. We were out of earshot, experiencing the dramas, dysfunctions, and unpredictabilities of our own lives. So, this is a book filled with stories about people, people with aspirations, with flaws, people trying to make a living doing something they loved. Everybody enjoys a good story. Radio is my story. I grew up listening to radio, listening to history being made on the radio. I remember playing with a toy truck on the floor in my grandmother's living room while I heard Harry Truman's surprise victory over Thomas Dewey being announced on a cathedral style radio. 15 years later, I would be on the radio when President Kennedy was assassinated. That's just the beginning of the book, the introduction to In the Twist of the Dial. And it'll be out, hopefully, and available at the end of the month of October. I think you're going to like it. Take care.